I'm just going to. Okay, so we're starting now, and welcome everybody. We're going to have more people join us, but I'm Nancy Morgan, the coordinator of Big Money Out Virginia, which is a group that works with American Promise on getting money out of politics. We're happy to see a lot of people who have our executive committee: Bill Millhauser, Jessica Mott, Patty Morrissey. I know I've heard of Nancy Kaufman. Mindy is one of our members. Trudy is running for the Senate and district. Remind us, is it Trudy?
Nine.
Nine.
District 9.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, what we want to do is Bill is going to sort of monitor the chat and look at what questions coming up. We're delighted that we have Cindy Black, who I've heard of over the years in Washington State, as a good, democracy advocate. She organizes these weekly discussions on democracy issue. And recently I met Jim Lee, who is also a member of it's Fixed Democracy. Remind me, Cindy. It's Fixed Democracy.
Fixed Democracy First.
Fixed Democracy First, because I actually get their weekly announcements saying, hey, we're having our weekly happy hour to talk about democracy issues, which they organize every week. We have Wendy Jones, who is with the union. Thanks for joining us, Wendy. She is very active looking at engaging in Virginia and improving good governance. So anyway, feel free to put things in the chat where, we're going to first what we're going to do is I'll give a brief overview of what we're doing in Big Money Out Virginia. Then we'll move over to Cindy Black and Jim and find out what they're doing in Washington State. I think that Washington State is amazing in terms of what they've done since 2006 in terms of good governance and especially some of their work on money and politics. At the end of the day, I think the challenge for all of these state groups that are working on democracy issues, good governance issues, is how to engage with groups and how to get civic engagement on the issue. So let me just screen share, and I'm just going to put up a brief presentation on just what on Money Out VA, Big Money Out VA. So what is Big Money Out VA? What is American Promise? Well, American Promise is sort of unique in the democracy reform space in that it focuses and federally on passing a constitutional amendment to the US Constitution, focusing specifically on allowing Congress and the states to regulate election spending, thus addressing the 40 years of Supreme Court rulings, starting with Buckley versus Vallejo, or maybe even earlier, but 1976, where they talk about money, that money is speech. So that when we started our group about 5 years ago, we said, oh my goodness, and I didn't know this, is that Virginia is known to be a pay-to-play state. It has some of the laxest campaign finance laws in the country. Our elections are escalating at record. The cost of elections are escalating at record levels. So we decided we're going to set this up and focus on both the two sides of the campaign finance coin, what needs to be done federally and what needs to be done in Virginia. Why? Because we, the people, not money, super PACs or corporations, should govern. So when you look at this, as an economist, I always like to look at graphs, and you can just see that there was a blowout year in terms of 2020 in terms of money and politics. This is Open Secrets. They're the national organizations that sort of follow the money. Basically, $16 billion in election spending. Of course, the red is this presidential, and the blue is federal elections, congressional elections. When you look at it, it's interesting that 25%, when you look at the congressional elections in 2022, $2.3 billion of that total, the amount that they spent on total, the cost of the elections, come from independent expenditures. What are independent expenditures? Well, obviously, when Citizens United was ruled by the Supreme Court in 2010, basically it opened a floodgate of money coming from corporations, which federally are banned since 1907 in terms of Teddy Roosevelt passing the Tillman Act. So all of a sudden it opened the door to all this money flooding into our elections, and the different independent expenditures cannot be coordinated with campaigns. But increasingly that the line between coordination is blurred. So you have this independent expenditures, and then you have the dark money, which is a component of that, the 501c4s, the 501c6s, 7s, where basically they don't have to report. Super PACs have to report to the Federal Elections Committee, but increasingly, I think it's pretty shocking that 25% of that cost of 2022 was independent expenditures. So there is a constitutional amendment, and we're looking, in Washington State, both Cindy can talk about this, and also Jim Lee, who is an advocate for American Promise and has worked with Cindy over the years on this issue. Is what American Promise is doing. They've introduced this 4-hour freedom amendment. What does it do? It restores the power of Americans to regulate election spending so we can protect our freedom, have our voices heard, and participate as equal citizens in our government. Just to give you a context, ever since Citizens United was introduced, there have been resolutions that have been introduced in the Congress, and in the 117th session, there were companion bills in the Senate and the House. In the House, 220 representatives signed up, but they were all Democrats with 1 Republican. So the idea here is saying, this is not a partisan issue for citizens. And basically 85% of Americans, irrespective of party, say that we need to get big money out of politics. And so the issue is to say, okay, let's try to find Republicans. And this message resonates with Republicans that, increasingly blue money from the left is coming in as dark money. And I think the writing is on the wall in terms of needing to get everybody agreeing. It's funny, though, when they introduced the name of this the language of the resolution, being in Virginia, there were all these truckers going around the Beltway. And I was like, oh, for our Freedom Amendment, it sounds like something, that would be introduced by, anyway, it is, I think what they're making a lot of headway with this amendment. I don't want to belabor the amendment, and certainly Jim can talk about this because he has great ideas on how nationally we can get this through. But basically, Section 2 is the part that is important. Nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to forbid Congress or the states within their respective jurisdictions from reasonably regulating and limiting contributions and spending in campaigns, elections, and ballot initiatives, which were sort of, nobody really thought about ballot initiatives, but all of a sudden it's like all this money is going into ballot initiatives on local levels. And how are we doing it? We're doing it state by state. These are all the states. 21 states have passed resolutions. There's a star in Virginia, but it's sort of misleading because we got our General Assembly to pass a resolution, but it ended up saying, we really like you guys for supporting this issue, but it didn't say the Virginia General Assembly supports this issue. So we have work to do to get Virginia on board. The goal is to pass this by June 4th, 2026, which would be 250th anniversary of our independence, which was really timely, certainly is time. All constitutional amendments have been introduced in times of turmoil, and certainly I think that we can all agree this is a time of turmoil. So just going on to the two sides of the campaign finance coin, there's a federal issue, state issues. Virginia, seriously, I didn't really know about Virginia, some of the problems in Virginia, but it is definitely a statistical outlier. It has no dollar limits of any type of campaign contributions. We're one of 5 states with no limits on contributions from corporations, and corporations have been banned from giving Fed money to candidates federally since, as I mentioned, as 1907. But, obviously I mentioned that Citizens United opened that door to all this flood of money. And one of the most egregious things that we really is no restrictions on politicians' personal use of campaign donations. So here we are, we're unique in the nation where we have no limits. So if you're a candidate, you can get, and I can tell you hundreds of thousands of dollars are going into Youngkin's PAC, the Spirit of Virginia, $200,000 a pop. And meanwhile, you can just spend it on your own, whether candidate or in a PAC, you could just spend it on a vacation to the Bahamas. So, and then limited regulatory oversight by our departmental elections, which means they can't even implement or litigate or monitor any of the current existing legislations. And again, you look at the graph, it tells a story. Our gubernatorial race in 2021, this was the House of Delegates, and the governor was the most expensive in any country, any state in our union. California, Texas, Florida, they had elections in 2018. We spent $140 million on a gubernatorial race, not including the $30 million in self-financing that Youngkin had. So, I mean, seriously, this is just, it is just outrageous. One House of Delegates, this was earlier in 2019, cost $4 million for a position that pays $20,000 a year. And I'm sure that here is Trudy running for a state senator. I mean, seriously, you're looking for all this money going into, you want to be a state senator, a state delegate, and you're paid $20,000 a year. So there's something wrong with Virginia. And definitely I took some open secrets data. And not only is it just the most expensive races in Virginia, but when you look at the breakdown of how much money goes by individuals, large donations above $10,000 account for 3/4 of Virginia contributions. And I don't know about how much you guys give. I usually give $35 or $50, maybe $100, but 83% of donors contribute $100,000 or less to candidates, yet it's only 8% of total contributions. So when you look at who are these 1,124 individuals, but they're accounting for the majority of the contributions. So we have lost our voice. And there's no, it's certainly not surprising that the Coalition for Integrity, who did the 2002 Swamp Index, we rated 46 out of 51 jurisdictions. And you can see we're only surpassed by, I don't know want to say surpass, that sounds like a good thing, but Utah, Michigan, Arizona, Idaho, and Wyoming. And so we've got a little bit of work to do to get legislation passed. And I just like to say, I'm so appreciative to have Cindy and Jim here, because Washington State is #1 in the Swamp Index in terms of good governance. So we're going to learn, why do you need to we're looking at focus on good governance in Washington State, but they've done it so well, so we can only learn from the best. Just a quick introduction and review of bills. This year in our General Assembly, which was only 45 days, there were 13 bills introduced in 4 categories: disclosure, independent expenditures, great bill. Campaign Legal Center worked on this. It's disclosure of independent expenditures and forcing them to reveal the 3 top donors, even for dark money groups that give. Died. Early disclosure of large donations passed, but the governor just made some amendments to it, I think, that killed basically the guts of the bill. Restricting personal use of campaign donations. I mentioned that, and I'll just make a quick note about that later. Limitations, we have no limitations. There were a couple bills, both in the Senate and the House, that died. This is an interesting bill, and I sent Cindy Black, that I just saw yesterday, she sent out a newsletter summarizing some of the Washington State bills that are being reviewed, which look like similar to some of our bills. But Tim Anderson, who's running now, I guess, for Senate in District 19, put in a banning contributions from foreign influence corporations, which I think is being reviewed. I think it passed in Hawaii, Minnesota's looking at it, Washington State looking at it. course, it's a very interesting bill. It died in our House of Delegates, which is basically Republican. Banning fundraising during special session. Suderland, who's a Republican senator, introduced it, died. And finally, a resolution supporting the amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was introduced by Delegate Watts, who's from Northern Virginia, Fairfax. It sort of died. She presented it, but it never really got a vote. It's what they do is they pass it for the day and then it kills it for the rest of the session. Other bills of note, ethics bills, we have basically no ethics guidelines, or there's no regulatory authority for ethics, and ranked choice voting. And I would love to have Cindy talk about that as a big issue. It's of interest in Virginia. There were 4 bills introduced this year. Two by Republicans, they died, and one of 2 of them companion bills. It was for presidential primaries. I think they said that our Department of Elections, the machines weren't set up, so they sort of pulled the bills. But this is another good governance bills that we're focusing on. So we had all bills die, and just to, the press actually picked up on it. I think, half of the building awareness is having it in the press. I just like to focus on the personal use bill. We were there at 7 a.m, doing our testimony, and actually there was Ren Williams for Southwest Virginia made a statement when he constantly says, let's lay it on the table, let's kill it, He said, I would suggest that donors need not donate to people they don't trust. And I would also suggest that they don't vote for them. Well, I gave my testimony, which was not particularly inspiring, but my colleague, Bill Milhauser, who's on this call, he said, Virginians need proper guidelines. We need clear rules and procedure written into law. And it was a very, but then they proceeded to vote it down 5-3 in the subcommittee. It was on a partisan vote, but it did get the headlines. Just what we're doing: legislative outreach, money out pledges, building awareness, letters to the editor, engaging with journalists, generating partnerships, working with communities, pass local resolutions, which I think is really important. And that a lot of states have been effective in that. Wisconsin, Michigan, there have been over 1,000 local resolution. Minnesota, I'm from Minnesota originally. They've been it's a very effective way to build democracy on a local level, because people believe this on a local level. This is not controversial. So maybe, I don't know how effective it is with their legislators in terms of a grassroots mobilization, but it's something that people can work on, strengthening advocacy skills. And what we're doing, we're excited about going into the most competitive election in Virginia history or in at least a generation, because of redistricting. We're doing a good governance scorecard with Common Cause Virginia, Represent Us, to say, do you support good governance? This is not a controversial issue. So here's some of the pictures on our Democracy Day in January. It was pretty exciting. We were ranked choice voting. We're looking at campaign finance. We testified on this personal use bill, 5 of us in the afternoon in the Senate. Unlike Tennessee, when this bill passed 15-0 out of the committee, there was everybody was shouting and clapping, and Jennifer Boysko, the senator, gave us a power thing, and it's fine. I guess it didn't it didn't exceed the decorum thing, but it was but as I said, it died in the Senate. So I just want to stop an introduction to Cindy Black, who's the executive director of Fix Democracy First in Washington State. I've been aware of her since 2016. She's been very active. And also Jim Lee, who's now with American Promise. He additionally has been very active. But I just want to play a 38-second video from one of our colleagues, Hendrick Smith, who's the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He did the Democracy Rebellion that was recently on PBS. He's done a lot of videos, but I thought that it was really worthwhile to show. And now I'm trying to find, this isn't a PowerPoint presentation, but I just want to show this It's like, oh, maybe I won't show it. I'm trying to get out of. I'm always, you'd think that after 3 years of PowerPoint stuff. Anyway, I just want to play this quickly, 38 seconds. I think this is pretty inspirational. Linda Block, the modern Paul Revere for democracy. I hope you can hear this. Let me know if you can't.
Yes, initiative 735.
Thank you.
We need to put the power of the vote.
We don't see your screen, Nancy.
Oh, you can't see my screen? Okay, okay. Let me just hang on. Okay, let me just. You'd think that after 3 years of this, it would share a screen. Okay, I think you can see it now, right?
Why?
Linda Bach is a modern Paul Revere, awakening the popular rebellion. She collected 21,000 signatures to help put initiative I-735 on the 2016 ballot.
I've long had the idea that I am continuing the American Revolution. Every signature I get is just another check for the Constitution and the power of we the people. Democracy, you must fight for it or it'll slip right out of your hands.
Okay, and I think that's a perfect place to stop. Democracy, you must fight for it, otherwise it will slip out of your hands. And I'm just going to turn it over to Cindy Black, who I mentioned is the executive director and founder of Fix Democracy First. She was instrumental in coordinating that ballot initiative. Bill, you have your hand raised here and you're muted.
Before we go on, Wendy Jones asked in the chat, so what exactly is personal use? Example, politicians often build up a war chest over time. Is it okay for one Paul to give money to their war chest to another Paul's campaign? So
yeah, it's basically there are no restrictions on how you can use your campaign funds. You know, you can use it to take lobbyists to dinner, you can use it to pay off your mortgage and pay off your, you know, there are only 2 states that don't have rules on this. It's Pennsylvania and the U and Virginia, and the fact that we have no limitations makes it even more egregious that you know, you can just raise money and use it at the end of the campaign. You can't keep that money, you have to turn it over. But I mean, it's just an example of it's the lowest hanging fruit in terms of any type of campaign finance reform. So thanks, Wendy. Cindy, I just want to turn it over to you, and maybe you can talk about what's happening with Fix Democracy First, some of your legislation, and I really want to get to Jim, who's really, you know, the whole idea of how to build citizen activism from the bottoms up.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Thanks for inviting me and Jim to talk about what's happening in Washington. As Nancy mentioned, I'm Cindy Black. I'm the executive director of Fix Democracy First. I've been with the organization since the end of 2016. And before that, I worked with WAMEN, the Washington Coalition to Amend the Constitution, which was the organization. We actually did 2 ballot initiatives. We didn't get enough signatures the first time around, so went back and did it again and got enough the second time around. And we got ourselves on record in Washington for calling for a constitutional amendment that would reverse Citizens United and several other court decisions. But I was the campaign director for that initiative, and then I stayed on as the executive director of Fix Democracy First. Before that, I was selling art supplies, so it was totally different career change, but it was important to me to continue this work. And so since then, we Fix Democracy First started as Washington Public Campaigns to work on public funding of elections. We had a law that passed with a ballot initiative that prohibited public funding of elections. And so that's how the organization got started about 20 years ago. And then in 2014, changed their name to Fix Democracy First to work on a broader range of democracy issues after they were successful in reversing that law. So as I mentioned, I've been with them since 2016, and we work on all things around democracy, voting access, money in elections, campaign finance reform, but also alternative voting systems, like Nancy mentioned, ranked choice voting and proportional representation. As well as we also have a 501c4 that we do our advocacy work. And then we have our education fund that also does civic outreach and engagement. So, there's a lot of things we've done in Washington. As Nancy mentioned, we're #1 in campaign finance reform. In fact, I want to put in, she showed the graph of the 2020 report. The 2022 report, we actually went up almost 4 points. So we're still #1, and now we're about 83.9% with campaign finance. So we've done a good job around a variety of different things in Washington on campaign finance reform, at least what we can do. We are limited around what we can do around campaign finance reform because of Citizens United and other decisions. But we were able to pass some really strong disclosure bills. In 2018, we passed the Disclose Act of 2018, and then we passed the PAC-to-PAC disclosure bill. So we have some of the best disclosure bills in the country. We also have a great public disclosure commission. I'm going to put a link in the chat to that. I think it's really important to have a good agency that oversees that. So you can check out the PDC website to show that you can look up every single election and look at all the candidates and find out where they're getting money from, because you got to follow the money to know what's going on. And so we have some really good disclosure, and we also have campaign finance limits, and a variety of other things. In fact, we're in the process of passing some more laws this year. We have a couple of more disclosure bills, as well as a grassroots lobbying disclosure bill that we're waiting to be passed. So we're trying to close loopholes where we find them and pass those. So we're making some good progress in campaign finance. For the longest time, Fix Democracy First, along with the League of Women Voters of Washington, were two of the only organizations working on campaign finance reform in the state. But fortunately, in this past year, we were able to help create a new coalition called People Powered Elections Washington to have a group of us, a coalition, to work on this. So we brought in several other organizations, including the League of Women Voters, Washington Bus, which is a youth-led organization, Northwest Progressive Institute, Urban League of Seattle, and a variety of other organizations, Washington Conservation Network, Washington Community Alliance. So we brought in community of color groups, youth organizations, and other good government groups to work on campaign finance reform. Our goal is to really also increase public funding of elections. I don't know if some of you have heard of our Seattle Democracy Voucher Program, where all eligible residents in Seattle get 4 $25 vouchers that they can donate to candidates of their choice that are participating in the program. That has been very successful, and we're trying to get that statewide. We got a bill introduced this year, but it didn't go very far, so we're working on that. And other types of campaign finance reform. We still don't have a close the lobbying revolving door bill that we're trying to get passed. So that's another thing that we're trying to do to improve campaign finance. The reason why you mentioned Virginia got a resolution passed to call for a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United. We tried that through the legislature and weren't successful. That's why we had to go to the ballot. And that's why we did that there. And so we do support continuing to support a constitutional amendment, but we believe there's a lot of things we can do in the interim around campaign finance reform. That's why we keep working on these bills. The other thing that Fix Democracy did is I worked with, and our organization worked with Free Speech for People to get an ordinance passed in Seattle back in 2020 that prohibited foreign influence corporations from donating to Seattle elections, like closing the door to like Amazon, Starbucks, Boeing, Uber, a lot of these big multinational corporations have significant foreign ownership. So we were able to pass that in Seattle. We're trying to get that also on a state. It was it got inserted in one of the bills here this session to happen statewide, but unfortunately that got struck out by the House. And so that part won't be going forward, but we're going to continue to work on that next year. So, and we also work on a ton of voting bills, automatic voter registration, same day voter registration, pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds in the Voting Rights Act of Washington. Also, we're part of that disclosed bill package of bills that we passed back in 2018. And then every year, we continue to work on expanding those things. We've had several bills that have already passed, including expanding online and automatic voter registration, as well as adding improvements to the Voting Rights Act. So, and ranked choice voting, we're constantly working on that. We did pass in Seattle last year. It hasn't been implemented yet. We've been constantly working on that, and we have been since 2017, as well as proportional representation. So, and redistricting and a whole lot of other things. So we're making some progress, but still have a ways to go. So I'll stop there. And that gives you a nutshell if there's any immediate questions. If not, Jim can go and then we can take questions after that. But lots of work to be done, but we are making progress here in Washington.
Bill, there isn't anything that I saw in the chat. I mean, I before just going to Jim, and Jim, perhaps you can give us more details about what you did on the, unfortunately, we're not a ballot initiative state, but how did you organize that ballot initiative? But Cindy, one of the things that we think is so important, and we're trying to do this good governance scorecard, is building coalitions.
Yes.
And a lot of times it's quite challenging. I mean, we like working with the League of Women Voters, but sometimes even Common Cause, sometimes there are a lot of issues with organizations. How did you manage to get such a big coalition of partners together?
Well, what's interesting is Washington is great around coalitions. In fact, the majority of democracy work I do is in coalition. For example, we've been members of the Washington Voting Justice Coalition since 2016, and that's the coalition that works on all those voting bills I mentioned. We also have a coalition that works on redistricting. We work with coalitions, redistricting justice for Washington and redistricting justice for Seattle. We worked with several other organizations around redistricting efforts. We also work with the Washington Voting Rights Restoration Coalition that enable people to get their voting rights back upon immediate release from prison. I mentioned our new one, People Powered Elections Washington. And we also have Washington for Equitable Representation that works on ranked choice voting and proportional representation. So we have several coalitions that we work with and our members and are actively involved with, because we know these type of bills and this type of legislation and reforms cannot pass without working together. And we're always looking for new coalition members. We work with the League. We host a democracy lobby week with them. We've done that 6 years in a row. And we plan to continue to do that work with them. So those coalitions, and including community of color organizations, youth organizations, labor and other groups, have to come together on this work, or it's not going to happen. So we've done a pretty good job in Washington in doing that type of coalition work, but it's constant work and constant recruiting and talking and building relationships. I think that's been the most important thing that I've come out of this coalition work, is those relationships, and the regular meeting and working together is really important for this work.
And another question, I don't see anything, I always have questions in the chat, but we're nonpartisan, you're nonpartisan, I presume. But how do you get, I mean, in Virginia, it's interesting because in Northern Virginia, we're very blue, the rest of the state, you know, around Richmond, go straight down is probably blue. But basically you want to get everybody involved, whether it's a Chamber of Commerce, whether it's veterans, whether it's interfaith group. How do you appeal to different groups? Do you do different messaging?
Sometimes, but we haven't had much success bringing in many conservative groups. We had more success, I think, before the 2016 election or the 2020 election. There were more conservative groups that were interested, like in ranked choice voting and campaign finance reform. But things have changed lately. We haven't had as much success bringing in more conservative groups. Independents, yes. They've been more interested in these reforms, but the far right are not lately. And so that is a constant challenge of how do you engage those groups when they are just not interested in even saying the word democracy. We've run into that, and that's been challenging for us.
Yeah, Bill, you have your hand up. And you're muted, Bill.
Yeah, before we need to get to Jim, but just real quickly, what is the balance between Republicans and Democrats in your legislature in your two houses?
Yeah, we have a trifecta. It's Democrats run the House, the Senate, and the governor's office.
Okay.
It's probably around, it depends. It's about 60-40, which is pretty much the makeup of the state.
Okay. Yeah, we're not close to 60-40, that's for sure.
Yeah, well.
And before we get up, you mentioned our democracy happy hour, put a link in the chat, but we do every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time, but anybody's welcome to join that. We cover democracy in the news and then various topics on democracy, as well as have open discussion and Q&A.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. I always get the announcement every week and I have to join because, I mean, as you said, you have special speakers and talking about different issues. And so let's move to Jim. And Jim is actually an American Promise advocate, newly incorporated into American Promise, executive director of Citizens Institute for Public Policy. And he served on the board of Spokane Move to Amend, which Move to Amend actually was very instrumental in Virginia in getting 4 local resolutions passed in my area of Alexandria, Falls Church, and Arlington and Charlottesville. I mean, Move to Amend, it would be interesting. I don't know if you're still on the board, Jim, or what your views are on Move to Amend. I know that in Minnesota, they have a resolution that is going through their legislature. Move to Amend tends to be more, we say money is speech issues, and basically they include corporations are people, which is more difficult to get a national resolution on that issue. But Jim, you want to talk about a little bit about what you're doing right now and how you came to join Cindy and Fix Democracy First, etc.
Well, I came to Fix Democracy First through the I-735 Wallman campaign. And like her, I just stuck around as that effort melded into Fix Democracy First. But what I want to talk about today is a strategy that American Promise is in the process of adopting. And to save time and make sure I hit all the points, I'm going to more or less read my presentation, so bear with me. But I think I can save a lot of time and get everything covered. So what we're talking about is a simple step-by-step, yet strategic and powerful process to secure the passage and ratification of the constitutional amendment to implement campaign finance reform. It's called the citizen resolution process. And the aim is to get millions of people to support the resolution, which says the following, and I quote, "We, the people of the United States of America, hereby resolve that Congress pass and the states ratify a constitutional amendment which authorizes Congress and the states to limit contributions and expenditures made to influence our elections and governance." So what we're simply asking people to do is rate their level of support for that resolution on a scale from 1 to 5, where a 5 means you're totally in support of the resolution. And the rating system gives us another powerful piece of information to help convince lawmakers that we, the people, demand it, which is it generates what you could call a strength rating, which is just the average rating. But rather than just saying we got so many, like a petition, we've got so many people that support it, we're able to say we have this number of people and they support it to a very high degree of strength. And so beyond that, it's just a numbers game, organizing and outreach to individuals on one hand and to organization, churches, clubs, etc. on the other. Our ask for organizations is not for them to join or even endorse the campaign necessarily, but just to invite their members to express their opinion by rating the resolution. We've already got one organization that's interested. It's communityrights.us, which they are, but anyway, it would be everything from, as American Promise does, Rotary clubs to church denominations to some unions like teachers and nurses. So our initial goal is to get 1 million people to rate the resolution by the end of 2023. The intermediate goal is to get over 10 million people to rate it over the following 2 years, such that the amendment can be ratified in 2026. As I think Nancy mentioned, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The ultimate goal is to institute a permanent system of direct democracy by using citizen resolutions to clarify the will of the people and set the course for the future we all want. At that point, we want every citizen who is willing to participate nationwide. Once the system is in place, getting future resolutions enacted will be much faster and easier. Wording similar to the citizen resolution, and I'll share this with you if you like, can be used by state legislators to call on Congress to put forward the amendment. They don't really need to address or submit the specific amendment wording. In the end, Congress will write the wording anyway. So, and then while lobbying is important, we don't believe that lobbying alone will get us there. It's going to require a clear, strong message from we the people to make it happen. Reliable polling shows that 75 to 90% of Americans support this type of amendment. But until we stand up and demand action, nothing will happen. The resolution makes that demand in a strong yet civil way. The outreach effort to individuals will be a combination of traditional methods such as signature gathering and canvassing, and newer methods like social media. However, the key piece will be person-to-person contact by phone and email. And personally speaking, I'm going to call everybody that I know, briefly explain the resolution process, then send them a short email with a link to it, and ask them to rate it, and then forward it to their friends and family. Again, on a personal note, I've made it total commitment to seeing the amendment ratified or to die trying. The good news is that I now know in my heart that it's realistically possible and will happen. So if I have time, I will share the citizen resolution page.
Sure, that's fine. You can just share the screen if you have a.
Oh, my computer's really slow. Okay,
I don't, is it up on the screen, Jim?
no.
Hmm.
Oh, there it is.
Wow, it does take, your computer takes a little bit of time to. Jim, you're muted. Oh, you're still muted. There it is. So Jim, you want to unmute yourself? Oh.
For some reason, it said that I'm automatically muted when I'm sharing the sound, but so can you see the page when I share it?
It came up at the end, but then you were muted. I don't know why it would mute you when you're sharing your screen. And now you're muted. I don't know if I can. There, you're unmuted.
Okay. So this is the page we'll send a link to for anybody who's interested. And it pretty much mirrors the American Promise points as introduction. They really like the term "our nation is in crisis." I'm not that wild about it myself, but big money is corrupting. Well, you guys can read it. I don't want to just read it for the sake of reading.
It's not that long, actually, so.
No.
I mean, I can read it. This undue unequal influence is a gross distortion of our system of government. It's preventing us from solving the most pressing issues of our time. Your support has put one step closer to getting special influence out of our politics and empowering the voice of everyday Americans. It's one small step for you, but one giant leap for democracy. I like it, you know. It's
So then you just read the resolution and rate it on a scale from 1 to 5. And once you hit submit on that page, you go to this page, my computer. So it's a thank you for adding your voice by rating the citizen resolution. Take a few moments to answer the following questions, and you'll like these, Nancy. First one is a checkbox. It says I'm a registered voter, and then we ask for their address to identify the legislative district. Next checkbox, a candidate's position on this issue would determine my vote. Next, I would like to receive occasional, roughly monthly email updates on the progress of the resolution. I am willing to rate future resolutions to help set the course for our self-governance. I am willing to help get other people, friends and family, to rate the resolution. I'm willing to volunteer to help further the process in my community and state. And finally, I would like a video phone call from an organizer to discuss volunteer options and another opportunity for them to put in their number. The phone number is not required on the main form on the resolution page, just the name, email, and zip code. So we're giving them that there's a space for the phone number, but it's not required. So we're at least giving them another option to do that. And then from there, they'll go to a volunteer page, which American Promise already has developed with their 6 paths of engagement and all that sort of stuff. I'll just show you one other quick thing because I think it might be pertinent for, man, my computer is really slow. Okay, man, it's jumping around.
Are you unsharing your screen to put something else up?
No, I'm just changing to a different document, but
I think you need to get out a screen share because it won't automatically shift to the new document.
okay, well, we're there now. It's just wanted to point out the legislative call for the amendment, which says, we, the legislative bodies of the state of blank, hereby call upon Congress to put forward an amendment to the United States Constitution, which authorizes Congress and the respective states to limit contribution and expenditures made to influence our elections and governance. So it's pretty much just a slightly changed version. And, you know, the thinking is that this is a simple enough thing that maybe the legislature will, or assembly, it would be, at least what we've seen in the hearings in Washington is that they tend to get bogged down in the wording of the amendment. Somewhat, you know, are really insistent on the corporations are not people. Some are concerned about a constitutional convention and all these things. So trying to really just simplify it down to the minimum amount of words. So I will stop sharing.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And just Jim, you were the one that's saying, and this is the issue for Virginia, is saying, okay, how do you influence legislators to, you can get, and I mentioned this, Northern Virginia is all Democrat, you know, we have maybe one Republican someplace out by Winchester, but you know, so you get 1 million people signing the pledge from Northern Virginia, but at the end of the day, you need to have people like in Trudy Berry's district and people in different districts, and they say, I want to hear from my constituents. And that's how we have to get, you know, if the whole idea of saying, okay, fine, maybe we can get the Congress to pass something, but to get it ratified, we have to have buy-in from everybody in the states, including Republicans. That's a
Well, if we can get the addresses and know what legislative districts they're in, then that's where that begins. And then, you know, the real work will be recruiting people to rate the resolution in those red districts, which is not that difficult. Ordinary people are quite often quite enthusiastic about sharing their opinion, and everybody knows that money in politics is a corrupting influence. So I don't think it'll be that much of a challenge. It's just you're going to have people who are able to work in those more conservative districts to get enough people to where it's impossible for those legislators to ignore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at 7 o'clock, I have a presentation to the Stanton, Augusta, Waynesboro Democratic Party, and the whole idea, okay, fine, that's a red district. There are Democrats running there. But just the entry point is through local city councils and county commissioners and saying, yes, this is not a partisan issue. We want to get money out of politics. I'll just give you an example of one of our colleagues who's in Wyoming, who got Gillette, Wyoming, to unanimously pass a resolution, a local resolution saying getting money out of politics. It's one of the most conservative cities in Wyoming, and they passed it unanimously. And this, and I mean, okay, we're nonpartisan, I'm a Democrat, but the only way you're going to get, support for this is try to go through local communities and build up their agreement that these are issues that are problematic to representation and our self-determination and federalism, whatever words you want to say. It's funny that Cindy said democracy sometimes doesn't work. I mean, with depending on you're a Republican or a Democrat, people respond to different messaging, but basically self-representation and party, a government for and by the people agree with that. That's a value judgment. So I really think that, anyway, I like your idea. As you know, we're going to try this in Virginia and get local, go through local organizations to get them to also say, say we want this. So, just because Trudy is here, and it's always good to hear from candidates running for office. Trudy, could you just give us a little bit of overview on what your view on money in politics is and how it affects your ability to run for the General Assembly?
Oh, I am totally against big money in politics. It's part of my platform. I've been talking with someone also, who will be doing a video maybe for me. Basically, yeah, get money out of politics because we need government of, for and by the people. And we need the people's voices. They need to participate in their government. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that you put out there and everybody goes, yeah, I agree with that. Whether it's a key, whether that will determine whether you're going to vote for a candidate that's not, whether it's guns or abortion or whatever. But I think that's a good message. Bill, you have your hand up.
Yeah, this may be a little bit of a pessimistic view in Virginia, but we have the Democratic leadership in our Senate, many of whom have served for 20 or 30 years in the House and Senate combined. And fortunately, many of them are retiring or been retired by redistricting. Many of these top Democrats take the position that it's best to have no limits on campaign contributions, because if we do that, that'll force all the money into dark money and independent expenditures. And we're just having a devil of a time with a lot of these Democrats, which they are not progressive on these issues. Now, we do have a lot of up and coming younger candidates, particularly in the House, who don't believe that. And of course, candidates in the Senate. But, our leadership in the Democratic Party has been, I would say, give them an F on this issue overall.
And just to follow up on something Bill said about, we're finding the same thing in Washington, is the younger up and coming electeds and candidates are way more open to reform than the ones that have, let's just say, been around for a long time.
Too long.
I mean, I think we have to understand that money is speech, but at the end of the day, money is power. And a lot of our incumbent, that's where they get their power base. I mean, it's a shame. And, so somebody like Trudy, who's running in the 9th district, I mean, it's interesting because even people in rural districts like Deeds, I really love him in Charlottesville. But I mean, they do say it's difficult for candidates running in Southwest Virginia. There isn't that money around like they have in Northern Virginia. So So it's, you know, if you take $20,000 from Dominion, that just helps your campaign because it's expensive. So it's anyway, Trudy, I really appreciate your, you know, commitment to this issue and
Because I have pledged not to take money from Dominion or Appalachian Power.
so
Yeah,
you're one
so
of the
it's-
Clean Virginia signatories or
Yeah, I was. So it's, yeah, we'll see. I've got a bare bones, you know, campaign funding right now, but yeah, it's hard, but I think I can do it.
well, anyway, I'll probably send you an email because even like in Danville and Martinsville and stuff like that, if we can identify some people to like go through the city council and say, we want to get money out of politics, that forces everybody, that changes the landscape on the discussion of democracy. I really think it's through that, you know, go to the bottom of the grassroots chain. That's how we got the 19th Amendment to giving women to the right to vote. So I think, you know, everybody agrees that this is a constitutional amendments happen at critical crisis points in a country. And this is, we're definitely in a critical crisis, you know, so Jim, you have your hand up.
Yeah, you make a really good point about the grassroots being the core of the effort. And I think the good news is that American Promise has come back to recognizing that and, you know, have hired people specifically to work on, and that's who I'm working with primarily, and they're the ones that are open to the citizen resolution concept. And, you know, hopefully the website will be revised to reflect that by the end of this week, and we'll be off and running. So, yeah, it's convincing. The only thing that's going to convince, especially the old dogs who, you know, it's their status quo, it's what they're comfortable with. They're not going to change unless there's a real clear and strong message from their constituents that this has to happen.
I totally agree with that. Well, we're here at 6:30. I'd really like to thank everybody. Certainly Cindy Black, you know, she put in the chat their Wednesday discussions on democracy. I definitely, because I get every week I get saying, okay, it's 8 o'clock, you know, and it's like, oh, maybe I'll, but I think it sounds really, you know, and she said that they have on average 60 people who tune in from around the country. So I think we're fighting the good fight here, and I think that you know, candidates like Trudy and other candidates. I know Erica Yellowitz is running for office. She signed our Money Out pledge. You know, we're getting more and more people, young candidates saying, yeah, we want good governance. We want and it's a non-threatening position. Nobody is against good governance. So Bill, final question, final comment.
Well, I just want to thank again Cindy and Jim for participating and also hearing from Trudy down in the far southern part of Virginia. And I think, Nancy, we might want to talk with Cindy further about their Democracy Day experience. You know, we've only done it for 1 year. For the first year, well, it was what we call Democracy Day. We've only had it 1 year. It was a pretty good start, but I think we really could learn more from you folks. So we might follow up with you on that. Thank you again.
Yeah, please do. Reach out anytime.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Cindy, and thanks to Jim. Thanks for everybody for participating. Karen, one of our staunch members, she worked on the Wisconsin. She's like engaged in everything, and I must say, hey, you know, money in politics is bad, but hey, we're glad that we won the Wisconsin Supreme Court thing, even though it cost $45 million to elect a judge. It's like, okay. But, anyway, thanks everybody. Great to have this.
That thing,
Thank
it
you.
was all that money and it was still only a 38% turnout, though much higher than.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I thought it was higher, but at least a lot of young people in Madison and stuff. I mean, and she won with 10 points. It's like, I just hope that nothing bad happens to her.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great result, but the other side of that coin was that Republicans picked up a Senate seat in Wisconsin, and they now do solely to gerrymandering. They have super majorities.
Well, there is more money being shoveled in there for another state race.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
No, actually, oh, maybe it's a congressional race, a
And-
special election. Yeah.
and we've had that in Virginia. Each party will pick out these, close races and just pour tons of money in them. So it's disgusting.
Seriously.
Thanks, everyone.
There was
Thank you.
one, it was Dan Helmer's, it was $4 million in 2017, was it? It's like, seriously, for a position that pays $20,000 a year here, this is, there's something wrong here.
Well, control in the House, though. So.
Okay, Cindy, thank you, Jim. Great discussion. Thank everybody for joining us. Trudy,
Thank
thanks
you.
for joining.
Thank you,
Thanks for
everybody.
having us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.